Hi, I'm Adnan Mahmutovic, and this is Love and Its Discontents podcast. My guest today is Joy Manesiotis, a good friend of mine and someone whose work I admire a lot. Briefly about Joy, she is the author of 3 collections of poems, A Short History of Anger, which won the New Measure Poetry Prize, Revoke, and They Sing to Her Bones, which won the New Issues Poetry Prize. Currently, she is staging a short history of anger at different festivals and universities in the US and Europe. Her poems and essays have appeared in numerous literary journals and anthologies, including the American Poetry Review, Poetry, and Poetry International, as well as in translation. And Joy sent me some titles in other languages which I cannot read. That would be hopeless. I don't want to ruin that for everyone. She is previously the Edith R. White Distinguished Chair in Creative Writing at the University of Redlands. She teaches in the MFA in a writing program at OSU Cascades and serves on the editorial board of LE Press. Joy, welcome to Love and Its Discontents.
Thank you, Adnan. Thank you for inviting me.
Pleasure. We are going to talk a lot about your book, A Short History of Anger. That's going to be like the main text we will go to. Of course, you can draw on all your writing or any other writing that comes to mind about the subjects. And before we begin, I just want to say something about this book. I heard parts of it during the process of writing. Times you've staged it in different places. So I feel privileged to have been a part of that process, to have heard different, moves and the way, in just seeing you adapting it live, like improvising. It's just a work of beauty. It's so much pleasure in following those kinds of processes, and then seeing, of course, the final version, which is printed, and. You know that from the beginning I've been so drawn to this work that it's always touched me so deeply, and I cannot recommend it enough to everyone. Like this, it's so beautiful, moving, intellectually stimulating. But this is something I wonder if. You think this is correct, or maybe it reflects the way you were working on it. But for me, it's one of those books which when I read it, it strikes straight to the heart. It just kind of makes my entire body. I have a bodily kind of response to it, like at that level. But both of us have worked in the academia, right? So we have, in our analysis, usually kind of there is this kind of like, first we love something and then we analyze it, and then we engage the critical mind, and we have all these go-to theories and all that stuff, right?
Right.
Yes, and usually, like, even if you love books, many books I have analyzed that I love, but what I find special about yours is the fact that even though I'm stimulated intellectually and I reflect on it so much, but at the same time, I cannot, it has this gravitational pull to the heart, which I cannot kind of disregard from at any moment in my thinking. And for me, that's really special, that I'm anchored to my heart throughout my thinking process. So I hope that was okay to kind of characterize it in that way. And I don't know if that's how you worked on it, if that was something you had in mind.
Well, I really appreciate that, because in fact, what I was trying to do, what I was hoping the work would do, would be to generate experience, not just talk about an experience, right? Mm-hmm. And I was trying to figure out how to approach that material in all its layers and all of its, with the historical burden of the events that happened, and then living through and with intergenerational trauma and all the things that it tries to I was trying to express it rather than to create an experience of what it would be, of what it was like to live through it. At many different stages, people actually. I mean, I didn't actually live through it. I lived through the effects of it. So, and I will say, by the way, I just want to back up and say that you were the audience member that I was most concerned about.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Concerned in a good way. That if you responded to it, then I knew that it was working, because you've lived through something similar to this and I have not. Right. And so I wanted to know that I wasn't crossing any lines, or that I created something that you could participate in a way that you just described. And thank you very much for that description, because it is very accurate in terms of what I was trying to do. And I did use lament structure. I did think about lament from ancient Greece forward, and so I was really trying to create a lament in a modern day version of a lament. So, so I was really after the felt sense of living through historical events and their aftermath for generations, actually.
Yeah, what an achievement, because this is really difficult. And I didn't know about this. I mean, this is the first time you're telling me, and I don't know if I had I been aware of it, maybe I would have thought about it differently. So, but what a beautiful kind of moment of sharing that in right now. I mean, after so much time. Oh, wow, amazing. Before we go into the book and all these other things, I want to, because this is a podcast on love, and in a sense the subject is tough. It is your book is about trauma. It is about genocide. It's about those really heavy things that we have seeing even now. So it's like this. But what is love for you? How would you define?
Such a tough question, right? You know this, right? You know that it's a tough question. I think, of course, we all know there are all kinds of different kinds of love, right? I mean, romantic love, filial love, parental love, love of friends and chosen family, love of culture, love of art, love of literature, right? So many different. So it's multidimensional. And for that reason, it's really hard to define it precisely. Every definition that I come up with seems reductive to me in a certain way. But in thinking about that question, what I finally, I think, land on is that love is a form of attention. That it's a form of attention that we give to each other, that we, it's that can be personal. It can also be of one's group or one's culture or one's family, right? Can be one person, but I think we rarely experience someone's full attention. And when we do, it can be rather terrifying, but it could also be rather revelatory, right? And so I think in some ways love is that kind of fully showing up and giving one's attention to something. And that means showing up in all ways, right? Not just intellectually, not just, so that it's a whole person kind of attention that we give to each other or to a situation. Yeah.
Oh, that is wonderful. And in that way, it doesn't depend on how you feel at any moment. It is not driven by like that you have to feel it in order to give someone attention. It's a deliberate. It's an effort.
Yeah, it's a choice, I think. Maybe not conscious all the time, but it is a choice. And I think, I was reading about forgiveness, actually, and thinking a lot about forgiveness. And I was actually reading about well, it doesn't matter, but anyway, one of the things that I came across was a group of people who had been terribly wronged, and they forgave it was actually their children had been shot, and they chose to forgive the person who did it, or the parent of the person who did it, and work together with them. And part of this was an Amish community here, and part of what they said is that forgiveness is a choice every day. You know, it's not something you do once and it's over. It's a process, right? And I think that's true of love too. It's a process. I mean, as much as I may love my parent, child, spouse, whatever, friend, there are going to be moments when I don't like them very much, right? Or they don't like me very much. Or, you know, the deeper you get to know someone, there's parts, you know, so, but love is a decision, right? It's a decision and a process. And it's a decision to say, I'm in this with you and I accept you, and I will, as you say, may not feel it every minute of every day, but I'm going to root myself in it nonetheless.
Yes, that really resonates with me. And you don't know this, but I often quote Raymond Carver's "What we talk about when we talk about love." There is this line where one of the characters says that in addition to being in love, we also like each other.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So it's very possible to be in love without ever liking each other. But I like how you say this, that, well, there are days where I really don't like you, you know. Right. But I still love you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That's wonderful. If we go to, I suppose the main subject here is, in a short history of anger, is the relationship between love and heritage. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, and where you're coming from here, and how you're viewing it.
Well, if I take that notion of attention, I mean, you know, I think I grew up in. You've probably had a very similar or parallel kind of experience, where I grew up in inside a Greek community in an American culture. So I was living in two cultures at one time, always. And that changed as I grew up, and we moved and we became more assimilated to, I mean, I was born here. But I was negotiating two cultures almost all the time. So I was very aware of the fact that there were different cultures, right? I mean, it's easy in the United States to not be so aware of that, right? And there was a way in which my Greek American culture was my home. That's where my family was. That's where my social life was. That's where all of that was, right? And so, and there was also expectation that came with that, right? And then as I grew up and moved away from that culture, I had to I saw myself making choices to bring parts of that culture back into my life. And so I think that that's part of, you know, that culture becomes a kind of home, and then that's a place we rest. It also can be a place of conflict and a place of many other things, right? Difficulties, but at essence, it's a place where we can rest. And because I was living and do live in a culture that is not a Greek culture or a Greek American culture that much really anymore, again, it was about a choice. It's about a choice of attention. How much attention am I going to put on this? How many of these traditions am I going to pull forward in my life? And I do think tradition in culture is a form of love, right? It's a form of safekeeping of the culture. And so I don't know that I'm answering your question very well, but I do think that, engagement in community and in culture, while it's maybe it's a fairly naive thought that engagement in community is actually the source of or a form of love of culture, I do think it's kind of essential, right? Yeah.
And in a sense, your book is about a historical event which was so central to many peoples, not just the Greek, but the Greeks. You are dramatizing the events of Smyrna, the genocide, displacement, movements of people, all kinds of things, and. Why revisit this event in terms of like this relationship to heritage? How is this an act of love in your mind, or how did you approach this?
Well, the part of it is that it was my mother's family story. So I grew up, it's not that they talked about it a lot, but I grew up with an awareness of it. And I knew I had a felt kind of physical sense of it. And I never really understood how was it that I had this physical sense of something I didn't actually live through. But I come back to that idea of attention that, and bearing witness. And so I didn't know that I was going to write this. I didn't plan to write it. I started to write a poem about it, and the poem just kept growing and kind of busting out of its form. And then it took me, I took it apart. I don't know, three times. I think you saw some different iterations of it actually, and reconfigured it because I was trying to find its form, and it turned out that it had to create its own form. But along the way, I think that it became somehow necessary, and so I guess that's what I would say about it in terms of love. I mean, in the face of genocide and all the atrocities, how does one show up? How do we bear witness? How do we make a space for it? And I think that is an act of love. I was recently at a Jewish museum, and there was a Holocaust survivor. There was a quote by one of them that said, "Don't be a bystander. Find what you can do and do it." And so for me, what I could do was inhabit this material and see if I could help, not keep it alive so much, but create an experience of it that might resonate for people.
Yes, and in that way, it's an act of love, not just speaking back to the heritage. It's not like paying back to that heritage out of some... of course, there is the pull of the family and ethnicity and all those things, but it's much bigger than that. The love here seems to be kind of break through those kinds of definitions, those borders, and that's something you do throughout the book quite a lot. You speak of like this transition in history from where people define themselves in certain ways and now have to define themselves in other ways. So you have those moments where you, for instance, talk about people, let's say maybe different religions or cultures, different languages, to having to use national labels, and right. The kind of rift that creates. In that way, it seems to me that it's kind of really opens it up to a much bigger thing than just kind of the pull of the family, the pull of the nation, the pull of the
One of the experiences that I've had in doing the staging of the piece in different communities I've been struck every time by how many people, we always have a conversation with the audience afterward, because it's pretty intense material for them to experience, and we want to have a conversation. And it's inevitable that people say, I'm from Syria and this is my story. I'm from Africa. This is my story. I'm from, all over the world. And unfortunately, genocide seems to be our default position as a people. And, so I don't understand that, but I think that was also part of what I was trying to begin to understand. And so, even though this was, as you say, specifically, in Asia Minor, and it was the Ottoman Greek subjects who experienced it, I think it's much more universal than that, unfortunately. And so, it wasn't just the pull of my family that made me want to keep working on it. It was how the entire series of events resonated and echoed out, and in hundreds of ways, which is probably true of any one of these situations, but this was the one I was focusing on.
Yes. Yes, indeed. I mean, just the topic of love and genocide, that in itself is so heavy. No light material there, but at the same time, there is the title is A Short History of Anger, and yet when I'm thinking of it, and it's like there's not a lot of anger in this. I'm not feeling the anger, and so. And
someone once said to me, "It should be called A Short History of Sorrow."
Yeah. So I think that the title is perfect. It is also, your name is Joy, so joy and anger. It's like I cannot imagine you angry. So that's something like, I'm sure you've been angry.
Yes, I do get angry.
I think all of us. It's just that it's very hard. Maybe I need to experience that.
I can be rather formidable. I'm not sure you want to experience that, really.
Well, let's see. But that is a part of the love as well, to be able to, experience and express anger and take that. Usually we tend to be most angry at people we love, and or express it more freely where we feel at home.
Well, I was also thinking about the ancestral anger.
Yes.
The generational, cultural, ancestral anger, specifically between Greeks and Turks, but we could slot in any number of different people's names there, titles there. And then how the people in the moment expressed so much care for each other. The people who were living there had, I'm sure there were conflicts, but they had created a very vibrant community. They had created a vibrant city where they were very much friends and neighbors and business associates, and they would get together, and they had these, they had a lot of shared culture and shared love. And when they were torn apart, I think both sides were completely stunned by it, right? And there are stories after story after story about them helping each other, trying to help each other, even though the state was telling them that they could not do that they were putting themselves at risk, etc. And so I was thinking a lot about otherness, like how do we make someone else other, and how do we go from being someone's neighbor to all of a sudden having that person be the other, right? And in the space of a couple of hours. And so I think the title comes from the generational anger, the generational conflict and hatred and difficulty that there's I don't know how much of it still exists, but did exist then. I think people have been sort of consciously trying to be more mindful about it. But
and I'm thinking that what you said about love, that it's an effort, that it's attention and so on. It seems to me that anger that you inherit requires a lot more work, a lot more effort to keep it alive. So it's really unnatural. Like there's this kind of reinforcement of anger, where and so what you need fuel for it. You constantly need to fuel it somehow.
Right. And well, and it also is, I mean, I think anger also creates energy, right? So it can be a little bit addictive.
Yes.
It can be a little bit appealing because it creates all this energy, but then it's spent, right? And then there's the aftermath of the anger, which is destruction, right? Usually. And so it's not helpful, but I had to very consciously, I don't know. I mean, maybe you did this as well. I had to make conscious choices about how I was going to not carry the anger forward, the cultural anger, and try to put it down if possible.
Oh, I agree 100% with that. That it's so counter. That kind of energy is so detrimental to the creative process. Mm-hmm. It really destroys it. So I think you're right. At some, for a moment it may look like, oh, there's a lot of energy here, right? But then when you realize, no, that's not sustainable energy. That is
right.
That's a wrong kind of energy entirely. And so it's I mean, what you're saying is that some of the things that you're feeling, of course, we have people feel that you say you didn't experience things yourself, but you have them in your body, and that kind of heritage of all those things is in the body itself.
Well, one of the things that was really fascinating to me, because it was just beginning to be available in mainstream media, the study of epigenetics, which is, there are many critics of it, and it's, there are questions about it, but there has been some scientific research that supports the idea that those kinds of traumas, any kind of trauma, is passed genetically, not just psychologically, right? And so that the DNA itself isn't changed, but there's a process called methylation, which so that how the DNA tells the cell to act, how the methylation tells the cell to act gets changed, and it can be changed in either direction. It can be made better, right? I mean, you could take someone who has experienced trauma and erase some of that methylation, or you can create methylation. And so I was fascinated by that. My daughter, who's in medical school, tells me I'm oversimplifying this, but
of course,
right, of course. But from a creative standpoint, from a physical lived standpoint, from a felt sense, and then in terms of the imagination, it was really fertile ground to explore, to think about how we're passing this to each other through our genetic structures. Or kind of as ornaments to the genetic structure that can be then somehow affected, right? So that was fascinating to me, and how to get that into a poem or into this hybrid piece, because as I said, I took it apart really 3 times and rebuilt it. I worked on it for 8 years, I think. So that was really fascinating to me. And how do I work that in? How do I make that part of this in a kind of lyric way? Because I was not trying to tell the story. I was trying to do something else.
Indeed. That's quite right. And that's where the experience comes from. And what was fascinating to me was exactly because you emphasized the fact that you didn't live it, and yet the way you deal with it, the way you describe it, the way you work with the content and the form is, for me, as if you have. And if I explain it this way, a lot of times this kind of heritage of trauma, or the inheritance of trauma in the new generations, it seems to me that we can see a clear difference between the survivors and the new generations. They have it, but they are living it differently. So they're far more prone to anger.
Interesting.
I would say easily angry. Whereas whenever I've read books by all kinds of survivors, we see the Holocaust survivors, and many others, that oftentimes there is this it's almost as if they themselves are a little bit, they're wondering, why am I not that angry? And why am I not hungry for revenge? So sometimes they emphasize it, sometimes they're kind of just thinking about it, or completely just ignore. They don't talk about it. Elie Wiesel, I think in Night, he says towards the end of his memoir, like, none of us felt like angry and wanting revenge, and that's something that I feel as well. Whereas sometimes in the new generations, we can see a little bit of that kind of pull, but you have none of that. And for me, that's just a kind of an interesting way of looking at it. Whereas,
I think that in the book there is this repeated phrase "Zoe Semas," or "Zoe Sesas." May their memories be eternal. I think every culture has that phrase, how you express your understanding or of someone else's grief. But Zoe Semas means life to all of us who are here mourning together, who are left here mourning together. And it seemed to me that that was what was driving this work, was the sense of how do I live with this in community? How do I well, we know revenge doesn't work. It just doesn't work. There's just a history of revenge not working, right? And so it's not going to be helpful. And my grandmother was angry at times about it, but they were also, what they modeled for me was, you live this moment as fully as you can, because you don't know what's happening in the next moment. And both, and so that was what they modeled. They weren't looking backwards. They were looking forward. They were being in this moment. They weren't litigating the past anymore. They were saying how fortunate we are that we are here. And they carried great burdens. They carried great sorrows with them, but they weren't. They didn't live inside their anger about it. And so that's what was modeled to me, even though they lost everything, right? But they didn't want that to be the definition of how they lived their lives. And so I think that's what I learned, because that's what I grew up inside of, right? So that's an interesting point that you say about how younger people are. Yes, it's interesting that they are more angry, and they are demanding a certain kind of acknowledgement, or and that's really an interesting point, actually. Yeah.
It seems to me what you were saying earlier about witnessing and love as witnessing, that what you just described about your grandma is that it's almost like the light. Just living the life is witnessing. Just living is witnessing, and that is an act of love. Just to live and be a witness is a huge effort and an act of love itself to all that.
Well, I think also that by the time I came into my grandparents' lives, they were many years past that experience, right? They were in their 20s when they fled. And so I think I don't know what they were like when they first, came to this country or what, but I do know that when I was working on the material, a lot of it is, especially in the face of all the atrocities and everything, we would rather turn away from it, right? We don't really want to see it. We don't want to have to show up and look at it. And I was very aware of not wanting to use that material in any way to get attention or to hold the reader's attention. That seemed really wrong to me. And so I didn't want any of it to be gratuitous, but I did want to be present. And I think that's the lesson that I learned from my grandparents, was to be present, to show up, right? In wherever you are in your life, right? And then that is a form of love of self, but also love of the people who you are in your life, or the people who you come in contact with. And they made choices. They did things. They didn't talk about it. They just did things, right? My grandfather was really he went by his intuition quite a bit, and he had a little pie baking business in Pittsburgh, and right before the stock market crash, he pulled all of his money out of the banks and sold all of his stock. So he was actually very well off during the Depression here. And he would walk to work. And on his way to work, if he met anyone who was out of work, he took them to his little factory and gave them a job. And on his way home from work, if he met people who were hungry, he brought them home and fed them. He didn't talk about it. He didn't make a big deal out of it. He just did it. And they did that in hundreds of ways in their lives, right? They expressed an appreciation for being alive in ways, or being more fortunate, or being fortunate to be where they were, in ways that they didn't make a big deal about. They just did it. Yeah. And when he died, actually, like 200 people showed up at his funeral we didn't know. Because, and I wasn't even there. I mean, I was a baby, but my mother told me the story that 200 people came up at least, and to her, my aunt, my grandmother, and said, "Your father helped me."
That is so beautiful.
Yeah. And so that was what was modeled for me, is you live it. You don't talk about it. You just live a choice, right? Yes. Or a series of choices that pushes back against the evil in the world.
Yeah. And again, that is the effort. That is the continuity of that effort, that you're consistent in that. That's your decision. You made it, and you persist in doing it despite everything. You're not going to get angry at someone and deny them food or help. It's just like you flew. Obviously, what I see in your description is that he saw this as his community. The way you
right.
describe these communities before the war, before genocide, says that there is that kind of taking care of each other, talking to each other, communicating. There's huge diversity. But there's no problem in it, communication and living together and all these things. Right. And in a sense, all of them are really showing a lot of love to themselves, their families, smaller and bigger communities. Whereas when the nation state, or when it comes in and demands a certain kind of love or loyalty, you see, this is so unnatural, right? This is not the love that you can express, because you don't know what it is. Yeah.
Well, and I do know that when they established the secular nationalist Turkey, which is what the Young Turks wanted, those citizens had to pledge their allegiance to that state, and it was very difficult for many of the Turkish Ottoman subjects. It was because they didn't define themselves by nationality, and they felt like they had to in order to survive. And that kind of forced fealty doesn't often work out very well, I don't think. It's interesting too, because the population exchange that happened after the destruction of Smyrna, it was brokered by all these international powers, but nobody wanted to take responsibility for it, right? Because they all knew it was reprehensible, right? This idea that they were going to just pick people up and move them from one country to another like they were cattle or something. But that moment, with all of the disaster that it created, it also defined something. It was a huge change in Greek history. I mean, it created a diaspora that the scope of the diaspora was so much bigger than it would have been in any other situation. So I think that's the other thing, is that Greek culture was spread across Europe and to the United States in ways that it wouldn't have been if that population exchange hadn't happened. And so it's interesting. One of the things I was trying to sort out was how those kinds of decisions made by, 10 people in a room somewhere, create movement of whole peoples, right? And redefine what the structures of different societies look like. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling to think that, right? That they're making this kind of intellectual decision that then creates, a totally different world within a country, and so the Greek Ottoman subjects ended up in all kinds of different countries, right? And the Turkish Ottoman subjects who remained in Turkey had to pledge their allegiance to Turkey. I mean, it's a very different, right? If you think about that, what kinds of requirements there were in terms of each of those people's kind of what's the word that I want, pledging of their lives, or investing in their lives, investing in their communities, investing in the country, investing in whatever, whichever society they ended up in or chose to be in after they were displaced.
And nationalism seems to me to take this part from the definition of love as a sacrifice, and perverts it in such ways, right? So yes, love does involve sacrifice and work and all those things, but it really perverts every part of the definition of of love, right?
That's actually it's a brilliant way of thinking about it, because it's exactly what happens, I think.
Because in those moments, like, you don't know how to communicate and what it means for you to love, your people. What does it mean to love them? And then, of course, there is someone who tells you, like, okay, well, this is how you love them. This is not how you love them. We are seeing that unfolding now as well. We see this kind of ripping of let's say the Jewish communities around the world, like, and how they kind of treat each other in a sense, from because of the situation. We see that in any country which has had. We have it in Bosnia. I mean, I have friends who have written about Pakistan, for instance. There they had these big movements of peoples as well, migrations, the split between India and Pakistan. And in the end, what happens is that this loyalty that you're supposed to show turns into oppression.
Yeah.
So you will oppress each other more within your own community almost than the other community.
So it becomes internalized oppression.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the toxic perversion of it, what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I just love like the way you use because I've done it as well, where people identify with the line of work or something else, the way they bake bread. In contrast, it seemed to me that this nationalist kind of way of reshaping love is a contrast and to what I think is real, authentic love, and that's how I see it. For me, the definition and expression comes exactly because of the contrast to that which is not. To that
Well,
which is
you
the
can't.
ugly side.
It's not possible to have the state decide, right?
No.
I mean, it's just not. It's yeah.
And speaking of communication, as that is a part of what community is, and what love is, I think it's so nice that you emphasize this over and over, the fact that people speak different languages, they are multilingual, and they communicate in different languages in the sharing of. Everything really. So can you say something about that, like love and this kind of multilingualism, or yeah?
Well, I mean, I'm sorry to keep bringing this back to the personal, but I grew up. Everyone in my family, and my parents, my grandparents, they all spoke 5 or 6 languages, and some of that was necessity. Right, because they were immigrants, and so they had to learn different languages because they lived in different countries. But it shaped, I think, how I think about language or how I experience language, and it's fascinating to me how things are expressed in, how you can say that if you say a word in 4 different languages, that really there are shades of difference for what that actually means or what the felt sense of that is. But I do think that there's a way that, my grandmother spoke to me in French when I was growing up. And I was talking with someone about reclaiming that language, going back and relearning it because I've lost most of it and I've been studying it again. And I'm getting great pressure to learn Spanish instead for all kinds of other reasons, which is also a beautiful language. But I said, French is my heart. I mean, because it connects me to my grandmother and it connects me to when I was younger and it connects me. So I think that there's a way in which language, is connection, right? I mean, it takes us back to, or continues forward, allows us to continue to bring something forward by speaking or thinking or dreaming in that language. And so and rather than have it be a barrier, I think it's more useful to think of language as a connector. There's a moment in the short history where one of the people, because I was using quotes from oral histories, and one person says, my mother's grandmother left 800 poems written in Cretan dialect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that. Yes.
Yeah, but they're written in Arabic letters.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, so it's a Cretan Greek way of putting the syntax together, building the sentence structure and the thought, but it's written in Arabic. And so I think that that's one of the ways that multilingual, that actually connects us. It allows us to weave together another culture, which is the culture of language, right? And and that's coming from all these different places, and that that in Smyrna they would sing their Christmas carols in 4 or 5 different languages together, so that everyone had a chance, right? Everyone got to have their. So that's a way of sharing, right? It's a way of sharing and letting in other people. That's one of the ways I think that being multilingual or having more languages at play makes the world larger and smaller at the same time, right? More intimate in some ways and also more expansive. And I would hope that's what we want love to do for us, to create intimacy and expansiveness.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because what you just said is the line I remember, is the one at Christmas we sing carols in French, Greek, English, and Italian, and in other places where that is emphasized, as you said, because that's something I recognize from my own history as well. Like so I remember finding some old like notebooks which are in Bosnian but written with Arabic letters.
Interesting.
So that was like, so there would be different ways of writing. There was Cyrillic Latin, there's Arabic, and you can see that kind of movement. There's no need to have like one dominant language, or one dominant as a way of identification. It is quite okay to to communicate whichever way you can communicate. I mean, like,
right.
I mean, all of us who have, I remember, becoming a refugee. It's like you can't speak any other language, and it's like, what am I supposed to say? How am I? They're asking me something. I have no idea what they're saying. And then I can't put two words together to save my life.
Wow.
And then you communicate in some other way. So there's like always you find a way to create an intimacy, and that I think is great.
In the Greek church, there's a service on Easter morning. Mm-hmm. In Greek Orthodox Church, you have services at midnight, on Friday night and Saturday night, and then on Sunday. And everyone's been fasting for the whole weekend, and there's a lot of ritual that's part of it. But the service on Sunday morning is called the Service of Love, mm-hmm. and they do the service in the language of every person who's in the church. Wow. So if there are Eritrean Orthodox people there, if there are Russian Orthodox people there, if there are Ukrainian Orthodox people there, if there are Greek Orthodox people there, so they make sure that they do some part of the service in every language that is represented in the room, and it's called the Service of Love. Oh wow, that just makes my day. Yeah, it's pretty great. that is so great. Absolutely. That is huge. What we see there is that you identify it. You're not just like, oh, there's a crowd before me and I'll talk, mm-hmm. right? You really pay attention, like who's there, and to identify where they're coming from, what they're all about. So if we say that, okay, what they have in common. The faith, the Greek Orthodox faith, but still there are differences, and we need to kind of emphasize those differences in a positive way for the sake of sharing and communication. It's again that sense of being present for each other, right? Yes. Of giving attention, showing up in a certain That's way. Right. Yeah. What a great way of showing attention or paying attention. Can I ask you about this? You mentioned it before, this phrase you're using, and this is the part in your where you, let me see, let's say page 16. So that when it starts with Orania, she died as a baby. Orania, mm-hmm. sorry. Mm-hmm. Orania, that's right. She died mm-hmm. as a baby, and then mm-hmm. you have a Greek phrase. Zoisemas. Mm-hmm. Yes. And there are some, what's interesting to me here, and I'll try to kind of put it like this. Yeah, I have so it too. So it's kind of a bit visible to the viewers as well. The way there is so many things going on here. The form, the way everything is like the space of the page, also which
scripts are used, what's italicized, what's not, and can you just say something about how were you thinking here?
Sure. So this is kind of a moment of the speaker speaking to the chorus, because there's a Greek chorus in the piece, and it was when the Greek chorus showed up and started talking that the form of the whole book started to come into focus for me. So in performance, the way it happens is the speaker is at one side of the stage and there's choruses in a group at the other, and the speaker is asking the names of all of these people. Urania, Yanis, Stella, Panayotis, right? And the chorus is answering what happened to them. So Urania, she died as a baby. And then Zoisamas is the phrase that we say. It's like, it's interesting because in American culture, people say, I'm sorry for your loss, which to me is a divider in a certain way. Like, it's like, I'm sorry for your loss, but it's yours. It's not mine.
It's yours, yeah. It's not mine, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm empathetic for you, but I'm not feeling it, but I'm feeling for you, right? But Zoisamas is, we're in this together. Here we are. Zoisamas is life to all of us who are left living. You can also say Zoisasas, which is life to you, which is another thing that people say. And may the memory be eternal is what's said in the Mimosama, which is it's said in all of the, and the Trisarios, which are the prayers for the dead. And so, and that's also said, and I know in Jewish culture, may their memory be a blessing. I think every culture there must be one also in Bosnian, right? I mean, yeah, every culture has those sayings. And so this is a situation at this moment where the speaker is asking the chorus, what has happened to my community? What has happened to my ancestors? And the chorus is answering. And they are all saying, we are left in this together. We are in this together. We are in this together, over and over again. And so, and I was trying to convey that on the page, which can be a little bit difficult, right? Yeah. So in performance, what usually happens is that the speaker, who's usually me, is saying the names of the people that she's asking about. The chorus is answering either collectively or individually. Chorus members are answering, and then the speaker is saying Zoisemas while the chorus is whispering, "May their memory be eternal."
Oh, okay, simultaneously. So we are to imagine.
Yeah, so it's all layered. Yeah, so it's being layered on top of it. It should be that you're hearing them all at the same time.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so I see how, like on the page, you try to indicate that. So it's not easy to figure it out, but I mean, you have some effect of it, but the oral, the audio.
And sometimes we can't do it. We can't have it be simultaneous because it just sounds muddled. And so, so the Zoisemas and May her memory be eternal comes right next to each other, sort of. But some of it is that I was trying to indicate different speakers, and some of it is that I was trying to indicate different levels of speech, right? That we might say this more softly. We're not going to shout this part, right? And also in performance, there's a lament, there's a chant, Agnia Parthene, which is a chant that's used in the Greek church. Then, so there's a low level drone of chanting going on underneath it at the same time, done either by monks or the cantors or whoever's in the space. Yeah. We recently we just did this piece in September, actually, at this shrine for Saint Nicholas, which is at Ground Zero in New York. And it was a small, looked like a village church that came down when the second tower came down during 9/11. And, it's taken it's a Greek church, and it's taken that community 22 years to rebuild it, and they've rebuilt this beautiful shrine that is lit up all the time and is there as a place for, it's a Greek Orthodox church, but it's really there as a place for anyone to come and to pray, to have quiet when they're visiting the 9/11 memorials. And so we were asked to come and do a short history of anger because they're starting a series at that church about religious genocide and about religious persecution. And so they asked us to come and perform it. It was an amazing experience, just amazing. We were, to get to rehearsal every day, we were going through the memorial at for 9/11. And, we were at ground zero all day, every day. And it was, moving on so many levels that I can't even articulate. And there were two cantors who sang that part, and the church itself was beautiful. And it's all marble, so the sound was just extraordinary. And that moment of having them sing the Agni Partene was really probably a highlight of my life, because it was so beautiful, and their voices were so incredible, and the dome of the church just filled with it. And that's what I was trying to have happen, like on the page, which is impossible, yes, of course, to have happen, yes, on the page. But there was that moment of having it realized. And so that was really lovely. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you tried to indicate that you are drawing on so many forms and heritages of the art of the expression. And I wish I could experience what you just described. I think that would be amazing for all of us to experience that. And again, the process you were talking about, the way you did it. But here you call it a hybrid work. So I'm wondering about the relationship between love and form. There is the form of the play, the poetic form, poetry. There is, of course, a strong indication of that it is oral. Yeah. So this kind of oral written, and that they're complementing each other so much. So can you say something about that?
Well, part of it is that there are many voices at work in the piece. And again, it's like it's in English mostly, but it's still multilingual to me, because there are different kinds of people speaking. And I'm not exactly sure, the ancestors are speaking, and all kinds of people are speaking in this piece. And I tried to just become the conduit for that. And listen as deeply as I could to those voices. And I had to give myself permission to move outside of any kind of received form, because I could not contain this material. It was dictating to me what it had to do. I had to just be receptive to it. And so, trying to figure out how to orchestrate it on the page was really interesting. And you were there when we first had a chorus speaking, and it was very clear that there had to be more than one person to say it out loud. And many of the stories, of course, came to me as oral histories. My grandmother, then my cousin sat with me for hours and told me about Smyrna, and then I went and did research in Greece and listened to other oral histories. So the actual sound of people's voices was really important to me. And that's part of what happens in performance, is different people, because every time we do it, we work with members from the community that we're in. So different people bring different things to it, right? And when we did it in New York, it was all Greek. The chorus was all Greek people, Greek or Greek American people. So they could actually pronounce the Greek, which was really good. Yeah. And they knew, they knew about this. And so they were coming from a very different place. I'm sorry, Adnan, I think I've forgotten exactly what the question was, but I think it had to do with form. Yeah. Oh, and that was the other thing when I decided to try to stage it, and I asked the theater director, who happens to be my partner, to work with it. It was so fascinating to me what he did, because I was still working on it at the time, right? Because it took me a long time. I worked on it for years and years, and there were placeholders in the piece that I hadn't written yet, that the chorus considers something. And I knew that there was something there, but I hadn't actually written it. And when I gave it to him, he saw things that should be happening with the chorus in those moments, even though there was no language there. And so for me to be able to see what he started to do with it, that he created this whole other dimensionality for the piece. He saw and heard something other than what I saw and heard. And so that process was also really interesting, to shape it into a performance. And each time, especially early on, the first chorus really helped create what it was going to look like and sound like. But going from the page to the stage was really it's a different thing. And then, because we were already performing parts of it, I started to hear something else. I started to hear the actors who had been, or the performers who'd been doing it, I started to hear their voices in my head as I was writing some of the chorus parts. So then there was all this layering of history going on, because I was hearing the original chorus, which were kind of ancestors, and then I was hearing people who were speaking that language in the present, and then I was writing, and I was revising and making other pieces. So it became this kind of interchange, really, at all these levels between the present and the past, and the imagination and the lived and the actual experience, which was, the people who lived through it, their voices speaking, which I had, listened to. So it became the form just had to try to accommodate all of that.
Yes, because in a sense that's keeping it alive. This is so, for me, so visible in the book itself, in the written form, exactly because it seems to me that it embodies those processes that you've gone through. And all those different forces that contributed to this, so that it feels as a communal experience. Although there's one author, but it feels like a communal work. It feels like a communal experience. Yeah.
I'm grateful to hear that, actually, because that's important. It's important to me that I feel like I was the conduit, but that's what all I was the conduit.
Yeah,
I mean, I was like the note taker,
isn't it?
Yeah.
If I may say, yeah.
I was the note taker.
Note taker, yes.
Yeah.
Which is best, of course. I feel that every time I've written something that I feel is what I feel is good is usually that which came through some kind of collaboration or intimate work with someone. So I think that's felt in the text throughout, and of course the way you hybridize it, the way you see that this form, it needs the poetic for the play itself needs the poetic form and not stage directions or any of those kinds of conventions, right? So it really, you're drawing on the best of all art forms that work together. What are the elements of those art forms that together work in chorus, in symphony of it? Yeah. There are many interesting moments where the director was kind of pushing it towards more theatricality, and I would be like, "Oh, okay, I see."
And then he actually also started to dial back the theatricality and was saying, this is too much. It doesn't call for this. It calls for something that the language needs to be just, the language is doing it. We'll just, let's dial this back a little bit. And until we found a place kind of in between, right, that uses the the power of spoken language and pictures. I mean, the shared experience of a performance, right?
Yes.
But keeps it, more in the world of readers' theater or.
And I appreciate this, that it captures both the memory and love in ways that, there is a kind of a distrust of the oral in, let's say, the academia, and it's the material evidence, the written stuff, and so you tend to neglect the importance of oral transmission and how that carries all these things that are important. That's something like we cannot deal with that because it's not material enough. We cannot. It's intangible, but it's essential. Yeah.
It's also, inflection, right? I mean, inflection is tells us everything, and so to hear someone speak about their experience, as opposed to seeing a transcription of it, completely different, right? So there's so many layers of understanding that happen by listening to the voice, and being present with that voice, as opposed to, I of course also love the page, and I love the silence of the page, and that experience of being alone with the work, or being in communication with the voice on the page, right? In this kind of solitary way, there's something quite important about that, and magical about it as well. But they're not mutually exclusive. They give, each of those experiences give a different kind of resonance. And, I think, the academic approach, I mean, it's really interesting because I read a number of, books that were written by British, scholars about Smyrna. And then I went to Greece and talked to a bunch of people and went to the Center for Asia Minor Studies. And they had all kinds of oral histories and other things there. And the difference is marked. I mean, it's a very marked difference between how a scholar looks at something like this and how even someone who is not necessarily someone who lived through it, but is trying to understand and tell the narrative of what happened. Like Giles Milton, he wrote a book called Paradise Lost about the Levantine community in Smyrna and what happened there. And it's just, they're completely different kinds of testaments to what happened.
Yes.
Right? Yes,
indeed. I'm enjoying this so much. I'm really is every second of it is so beautiful. There's so much to talk about. I do want us to talk about food.
I love talking about food.
Yes, let's talk about food. It's present in the book, of course, a lot, and there are lots of things that seem to me that are common to different cultures. There are things that we have in Bosnia, same names as well, maybe it's slightly different. Let's begin with coffee, please. So you had it in the opening of the book. I mean, and I thought, okay, well, this is brave to have a scene which describes how you make coffee. And of course, it was Greek coffee, Turkish coffee, Bosnian. We say it's Bosnian coffee, so we appropriate it. But it's the same way of making it.
Right.
It reminds me also of this song, which is there is this melody that is common to many of our cultures. You find it in Bosnia, in Turkey, in Greece, in I think in Bulgaria, Serbia, and lots of places. Same melody, local text, local lyrics, and everyone thinks this is the most authentic local thing that there is. So this is ours. This is what defines the essence of who we are. Everyone really, and you really feel it. I'm not. you really do feel this captures the Bosnian soul, or the Greek soul, or the Turkish soul, and it does. I don't doubt that. Mm-hmm. So that scene in the beginning where you you make coffee.
We make coffee.
Yes.
Right.
Can you read that and then tell us about that? Let's, if you begin that just a bit.
Some say clockwise, some say tipped away from the handle, but quick flick of wrist, she flipped the cup upside down on the saucer, laughing, circled the cup in the air 3 times. First, brew the coffee thick and dark and sweet, and sit together, the women. First, warm the water in the briki, spoon coffee and sugar. First, allow the coffee to sink, then stir, and heat until the coffee foams up, and lift from the stove, and it foams again, and lift again, until it is steaming in each cup, and you sit together. And finally, the cup lifted away, the grounds painted down the sides. Ah, she would say, you have bad luck in your future. Ah, she would say, you must go home. Ah, she would say, there is happiness flying toward you. There is a bird. The grave must be cleaned. A marriage ring. There is money.
Yes, all of it, that you capture here, the in a sense the mechanics, but also the significance. What is it for the ritual, which is not just the joy of that coffee, that beverage, but also the communal experience of. Looking into the future, so using the cup to and the pattern as ways of
to read.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's just kind of we have, everyone feels that really intimately. So yeah. So let's begin with that, the food and the so much love.
Well, you have to know how to make coffee.
Yeah.
You do. You just have to know how to make coffee. If you don't know how to make coffee, you're in trouble.
That's right. Yes.
Culturally, you're in big trouble. And you have to be able to make this coffee, which is really it was Turkish coffee, right?
Yeah.
But then we call it now Greek coffee. You call it Bosnian coffee, right?
Yeah.
But absolutely. I think it originated in Turkey. But
I'm sure, yes.
Yeah.
And you definitely need to know, because I was not coffee drinker because I was, sensitive to caffeine. But, if you are married in a Bosnian family, your mother-in-law will make sure that you know.
Right.
So I was a slow learner, but good.
Yeah. And and then the reading of the coffee grounds is a really important thing, right? Where they turn the coffee up, the cup upside down afterwards, and then they read the grounds, which I've never developed facility for how to read them, but I've had them read many times, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't know at all what to look at, but they can see all kinds of things. Yeah.
Right. Right. So, I think food is, and sharing of food. I mean, I can't think of anything that expresses love more completely than that, than making food and then sharing food, because it has everything to do with all the things we've been talking about, right? It has to do with culture and passing on traditions and sustenance and attention and gathering together and sharing, right? And then literally feeding someone it's the essence, for me, it's the essence of love. And it's the way that I personally express love most completely, I think, in some ways in my life. And so it was really important, and food in Greek culture is huge. I mean, it's just huge. So as it is I'm sure in most Mediterranean countries and Eastern European countries, right? It's just, and it's woven into the culture in a way that, is so central that it becomes almost, almost taken for granted, I think, in a certain way. I mean, it's so important that it's everything revolves around food. So also not having it, being displaced, starving, that's was huge, right? It's huge, of course, for anyone. But so I think that some of my, the way that food keeps showing up in the book and is because I make this joke that I'm thinking about food all the time. Because I'm thinking about the next meal I'm going to make, or what do I have in the house that I can do with this, right? And it's also a form of creativity, right? It's so much fun that it's all the good parts of what love is. It's all the one. There's no conflict. It's all it's all the good part. And to feed someone else seems to me the most. Really the most essential way, expression of love. Yeah.
I think nothing more needs to be said. I think that's a perfect way to wrap it up, to end on a note of in a sense, we've traveled from that first question, what is love, where you've and I knew that things would happen throughout the conversation and that we would arrive at something interesting and slightly different, but also very, very kind of in tune with what we started with. So thank you so much, Joy, for this conversation.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure. Such a pleasure, Adnan.